Welcome to Aspen Leading Edges podcast. I'm Patty Roberts with St. Mary's University School of Law. Today's guest is Alex Ruskell. He is the director of the Academic Success and Bar Prep program at the University of South Carolina School of Law, a position he has held for 12 years. Welcome, Professor Ruskell.
Hi, how are you?
I'm delighted to talk about the bar exam and not be studying for it myself.
No kidding. I always tell my students that, and this is advice for any student, if a student's listening to this, is basically you don't want to get sick, but study so much that you're only feeling going into the bar exam is pure anger that anybody makes you do this, because weird stuff happens the day of the bar exam. When I took the Texas bar, I actually ended up sitting next to a woman I didn't know, but she cried the entire time.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And it didn't throw me because I was like going, I've done everything I possibly could do. And also, my other advice about that is like, people always say it's the worst summer of your life, but I'm like, if this is the worst summer of your life, you'd led a really charmed life, so knock it off. And also, in my experience, everybody flips out at least once. So just flip out once, get it over with, go back to what you're doing. That's totally normal. Some people flip out more than that, and that's also normal. Just keep doing what you're doing and you'll be fine.
Yeah, I just sent a message to my bar takers and I said, be like Tom Brady, because, he just accepted his induction into the Hall of Fame. And he basically just said, do the work. Like, it's hard. You have to be determined. You have to be committed, but do the work and it will come. So I hope that all of our takers pass this summer. I would never want to take it with someone crying next to me. And you're right, everybody does freak out at some point. But to your point about being so angry because you've had to do this the worst summer of your life and that kind of stuff. But if you have to do it again, it's even worse, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But the other side of it is it's not the worst thing to have if you have to do it again. But it's such a raging pain that you don't want to. And like things I always say also to my students is one thing, exercise every day when you're studying just to get some yayas out. So I went to the University of Texas, and Austin has a lot of really cool outdoor pools. And so every day I went swimming. And so I could swim a little bit, get some exercise, and see people. Then when I moved up to Massachusetts, I started boxing again because it was cold. It was February. I wasn't going to go swim. The guys in the boxing gym were very, I guess, grounding. And it was nice boxing again because I could hit people when I was feeling frustrated. But, they were always like, when I was really worked up, they'd say, well, what happens if you fail? I was like, well, I have to do it again. And they were kind of like, so? I was like, yeah. I said, I understand what you're saying, but I absolutely do not want to do this again. And that's one of the things. If you really just put in the work, you'll be fine. And a lot of times students don't believe me when I say that the people, unless you just go in and flip out, but I think one is a corollary to another. If you really put in the work and feel like I've left it out in the field, then you're going to be absolutely fine. But the way stress works is like, if you feel like, oh, I didn't do hearsay enough, the night before the exam, you're going to be thinking about hearsay. It's going to be keeping you up. And that's not all right. You don't have to know everything. But the people that don't pass tend to have not done everything they were supposed to do for their bar prep. It's not like everybody's doing 100% of the work and throwing themselves at it. It's not. A lot of people, for one reason or another, don't do the work, and then they tend not to pass. So it really is, and that's actually what I think is valuable about the bar exam. There's lots of talks about, we're changing the bar exam to the next gen and things like that. But I do think the current bar exam, and next gen, I assume, will be the same way about this, is I think it's valuable in the sense that as a legal skill, clearly you're never going to be filling out bubbles again. You'd get disbarred probably if you're giving law off the top of your head for 30 minutes or less kind of thing. But it's an absolutely doable task. It's hard. You just have to make yourself sit there and do the work. And I think that is a valuable thing for attorneys, because especially when you first start out, like, no one comes to you with problems that are fun necessarily. There's not like, I have to ride all these roller coasters, I'm going to pay you to do it for me. And sometimes, law practice is great, but sometimes you're going to get some things where you just don't want to do it or not that interested in it. I started out in environmental law, and in my head, I was going to be defending bears against squirrels. I don't know, marching the woods kind of thing. And my first case was about milk, and it was great. I was on the side of the angels with that one, milk and phthalates and milk and milk reproductivity and stuff like that. But, I had to learn about milk, and that wasn't really what I wanted to do, but I sat down and learned a lot about milk. So I do think the bar exam, if you just look at it that way, as it's not how smart you are or any of that, which I truly believe it's not. It's just like, can you make yourself sit there and do that? And if you can make yourself sit there and do your bar prep or whatever you're doing, you'll be fine.
Absolutely. Wholeheartedly agree. Now, before you joined the University of South Carolina to do academic success and bar prep, were you at other institutions? And if so, did you serve the same role?
Yeah. So I was at Roger Williams in Rhode Island for 6 years, I think. And then I was at, it's now currently UMass Dartmouth for a year before that. And then before that, I was at University of Iowa doing legal writing actually for a little while,
So
for 4 years, I think. So I've been
what got
bouncing around.
what got you interested in moving from legal writing to academic success and bar prep?
Actually, it was a job. So I was doing legal writing. The way I got into legal writing was I went to the Iowa Writers Workshop for fiction. Like I had been practicing and just I'd always wanted to go. And probably my first or second day there, someone said, "Hey, you're one of the lawyers doing this." There were a couple people that had law degrees. Would you like to teach legal writing? I was like, okay. And that's kind of how I got into that.
So
And
it's potential pool of legal writing faculty for
yeah,
you.
yeah, yeah. I mean, there really
Okay.
is. I mean, and this was before. Now they have more of a dedicated professor to do it, but at the time it was a little looser goosier. So I think they were just like, "Well, get these people." So I did that, and then like I always tell my students when they're worried about jobs, like I've told every job I've ever had, I've fallen into backwards and wasn't a lot of planning, which seems to make a certain kind of person feel better about this. I guess a person like me, I suppose. But then my wife, we had our first child. I mean, my wife had the child. I did not have the child. I was just there, and she's from New York. And one of the things about Iowa City was great, but it's almost like living on an island. It's very hard to get other places from Iowa City. And it was our first kid, and she wanted to be near her mom in New York. And I basically kind of drew a map of like 3 or 4 hours from New York City. Where could I get a job? And this academic support job came up, and I basically applied for it and got it. And that's how I ended up doing it. And I was interested in it. It was because it was very much a new kind of thing at the time. Very much like legal writing had been years before. Nowadays, I think it's much more of a commonly accepted thing, but at the time it wasn't really, it was new. It was very much like a new thing coming into it and stuff. So, and it turned out to be great. I really liked it. And then I just kind of have been bouncing around doing that ever since.
Well, that's terrific. And you certainly have excelled in it because you've not only continued doing the work of bar prep and academic success, but you've written 3 books or been part of writing 3 books for Aspen Publishing related to the academic success of law students. Let's start with the one that you wrote, Strategy and Tactics for First Year Law Students, that is in its 2nd edition with Aspen Publishing. So what can people expect from that book other than the obviousness of the title?
Yeah, I mean, so basically, one of the things I've noticed about law school and academic success offices have been fulfilling this. It's not anything any special notice at all, but one of the things about law school is a lot of people struggle at the beginning in the first year, but it's a very new experience as far as most people's undergrad. Even if you've done like pre-law, it seems to still be a pretty new experience. And there's a lot of mistakes that people make that they don't need to make. That as far as doing, the right things, and this book kind of goes through the right things about like making yourself a schedule, outlining how to take notes in law school. And I remember this from the first year of law school too, and I'm sure you do. The first year of law school becomes pretty intense in the sense that you're getting information from all over the place, and people are telling you to do it this way or that way, or don't do this or don't do that, and you kind of don't know who to believe. And I was new to law school. Like I when I went to law school, I actually remember the first day sitting there thinking like a tort was a delicious dessert. I was like, oh, a tort is what? It's kind of like, huh? But and so there's a lot of stuff I just didn't know. I kind of knew things, but you get so scared so intense your first year of everybody being stressed out and all these A-type personalities, and people were used to being really good in college, and now suddenly they kind of prove themselves again, and it gets all weird. But you don't know. You're scared for like, what am I supposed to know? What am I supposed to do in this exam? What kind of questions are they going to ask me? So the book is really kind of to give students that first, like, what you should do your first year, because like I said, a lot of people that first year, they'll either treat it like undergrad or they'll take advice from all over the place that's not great, and then they kind of, for that first semester especially, they'll like walk into the buzzsaw of exams. And unfortunately, the way law school's set up, most of the time you have like one high stakes exam at the end, and so if you walk into that without knowing what you're doing. All the time, I have students say, oh, I understood the class and I did this and I did that, and still the exam ultimately is what matters, and they do terrible in the exam.
Right. Yeah. Then it's always a stunner, right? Because they were the top, everybody
Absolutely.
was the top 10% of their undergraduate
Mhm.
class. And then all of a sudden, 90% of them are not. Well, good. So that's in its 2nd edition.
Yes.
Correct. Strategies and Tactics for First Year Law Students. And then let's transition to the bar. So Strategies and Tactics for the Finz Multistate Method now has its 6th edition. But I have to say, I don't know what the Finz Multistate Method is. So can you first tell us about the Finz Multistate Method?
All right, so it's a book basically of MBE style questions, which is a multiple choice part in the bar exam, and over 100 questions in each topic. I don't have the exact number in front of me, but a lot of questions. And Finn's method is kind of doing a true false analysis for each section. To back it up, I guess, a little bit. A lot of people have a hard time with multiple choice in the bar exam. And I think it's because basically you spend 3 years of law school getting terrible at multiple choice because you're trained to think of different things. And multiple choice just has you focus in on one piece of black letter law. And in my experience, students based on multiple choice exams for the bar, they outthink themselves. And this is also true for the just law school in general. And actually, this book is helpful for that too. If you have taken an exam that has a multiple choice section, I taught con law this spring and I had a multiple choice section. And a lot of people did really bad on the multiple choice section. I met with a woman yesterday, and one of the things she did was she's like, "Oh, I knew I did terrible on the multiple choice," and she did great in the essay, so that saved her. But and I was like, "Well, why?" And she's like, "Well, it was a 4 hour exam, and I guess she had time left, and she went back and changed 14 of her multiple choice answers to the
Oh,
wrong answer."
yeah.
So, and I was like, I told you not to do that. In general, brain science wise, your first choice, if you've been studying, your first choice should be the right one. And law students overthink it. And Finn's thing is taking out the question choices that absolutely cannot be correct. So you'd be put a little F, for false true statements. And a lot of times you can get through multiple choice doing that. Like if you have a question saying, for example, like what provision of the Constitution has to do with when someone asks for a hearing, and let's say your sample or your answers or something like substantive due process, well, you can cut that off immediately because that's not a provision. And then if you have like equal protection and taking clause, well, you can get rid of those two immediately because that has nothing to do with hearings. And that leaves you with the right answer, which might be like due process clause or 14th Amendment or something like that. And one of the things with multiple choice questions is when you write them, at least when I write them, and I think everybody does the same thing I do, is you kind of come up with a piece of black letter law, something like only defendants can move to federal court. And you can't have a dumb test. So you can't say who can move to federal court, defendants, dogs, donuts, devils, because that's just stupid. So at least the way I do it is you put the right answer there and you got to hide it. So you think about people's heads, like if they half know this piece of black letter law, where will the head go? It's not a trick necessarily. It's just you got to hide the answer.
Right.
So you kind of use that. Well, if they kind of half know this, where might they go? And like in that example, I would just made up like substantive process is a thing that a lot of people would just jump on because they go, "Oh, I've heard of that." And really the idea of Fins, and I believe this with all my heart for all multiple choice, is it's very much like a jump shot. You can get really good at it if you practice. And also in practicing and noticing, like, for example, a lot of questions will go down the same route of things as far as like wrong answer choices and things like that. So if you know how a question's set up, like if you're doing hearsay and you're doing the exception about excited utterance, all those questions are going to basically, the difference in the questions will be how soon in time it was. So the person will be excited and it'll be like a second afterwards, or it'll be like 24 hours later, they're still excited. And that's kind of where you're looking for it. Or also the other thing with Fins is having some multiple choice questions in areas you might not have gone over in class. Like when I taught con law this semester, just because I didn't have time and it's not that interesting, I didn't go over bill of attainder. I was like, oh, why am I going to do that? And it's on the bar. It's easy. But if you've never seen it, you might go, "Oh, what is this?" Or also the bar exam tends to, I think, test some things that aren't exactly the things that professors like to focus on. Like there might be a lot of intentional tort questions where most people like to focus on negligence. There might be like illusory contract questions or unilateral contract questions, which again, I don't think people focus on a ton just because it's not as interesting as the other stuff.
So how long has the Finns Multistate Method been in existence?
I want to say like probably like 15 years, maybe 12 years. I've been editing the thing for, oh wow, I think like 18 years. Yeah,
Okay.
like 20 years.
Well,
I'm
it
becoming
it
elderly.
makes sense, right? If you're on the sixth edition now, 18 years, kind of every 3 years. So for those professors or students who are thinking, well, maybe I want to check out the Finns Multistate Method, or maybe they've been familiar with it in the past, what can they find that's different in the sixth edition?
So it's really updating the questions, adding more questions. The style of the questions over the years have changed, whereas the way questions are set up on the bar exam now, they're set up in kind of a binary system where there's two yeses, two nos. And also things have been taken out of the questions from back for whatever, where you had people's names like, Barry Burglar and things like that. So all that's gone because they don't ask questions that way. But then also with the newer questions, trying to focus it more on the kind of stuff they will ask, whereas things have changed over the years. Things like mortgages have gotten more into it, just as law has changed and different interests have come in different areas. Like I think presidential powers and stuff tends to pop up more, maybe more in classes than it ever did before. And just that kind of thing. So really in the new edition is just updating it to be as in line with the modern bar exam as possible.
And if we have any students listening who are taking the bar exam this summer, would this just muddy the waters if they checked out the strategies and tactics for the Finz Multistate Method now while they're preparing and already in their commercial course and maybe their own school course?
Oh no, not at all. I go back to you don't want to make yourself sick, but you should study so hard that you feel like, again, just pure anger. I always tell my students, not that this is part of the advice, but the day before the Texas bar exam, the night before, I went to a Fish concert. I don't even like Fish. I'm into like punk rock, and Fish is a jam band. But it was kind of nice to be with all these hippies going, he's taking the bar tomorrow. But a lot of times students with the multiple choice, because again, a lot of students don't like them or feel comfortable with multiple choice. The more practice you do, the better. And just being able to have extra questions and stuff to crank through. And just what I would say, and this is my advice in the Finn's book as well, whatever you're using, make a big list of things I do not know. And so as you're going through practice questions, and don't like do an exegesis for every question you miss. Just, a short little thing like did not know only defendants can move to federal court. Did not know substantive due process isn't a provision of the Constitution. Whatever. And make a little list. And every night before you go to bed, read over your list of the things you didn't know. And then by the time the bar exam comes around, you'll never not know those things again. You will know those things, but you've read it a bazillion times.
Right.
And if you didn't know it, you didn't know it for some reason. Either you didn't have it in your class, or it's just something that would never stick in your head for what reasons, who knows why. You always had it wrong for some strange reason. But then also, if you didn't know it, it probably makes a pretty good question. And so it'll probably come back. And if, like, for example, if you know with the hearsay exception with excited utterance, if you know it's all about how long in time has passed, then you'll be fine. Either way it comes, either it will be excited utterance because it's immediately and they stubbed their toe and yelled, "Is it terrible people do this in the streets?" or whatever they yelled. Or it's like 24 hours later and they're still angry.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I just had to take my car because it had a nail from the construction down the street in it. And like immediately when I saw the nail, if I yelled, "Oh my God," but I'm still ticked now.
But it wouldn't be an excited
a couple hours now that I've been doing over this whole nail situation. So, and I think more practice the better if you really can feel, because also with the multiple choice, and if you think about the UBE, I mean, no one gets a perfect score, but theoretically you only have to know 200 things. And practice with the bar, you can absolutely know 200 things because you probably know 200 things about other stuff. Like I'm sure I know 200 things about music because I'm a music dork, because I'm interested in it. And with the law, you can absolutely, and you'll see the same questions over and over again. So the more practice you get, you're like, oh, here we come.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the one where, and you can see where, like illusory contracts, they'll have someone say, I'll sell you as much as I'd like to. You have to just see that and go, okay, great.
I love your idea about the list of did not know and reading it the night before or every night before you go to bed. Do you recommend that be handwritten? Because I think that can help you retain it.
Yeah, because I'm a big believer in those. Sometimes I break this rule myself, is like done all the studies about looking at computers before you go to bed, that it just keeps you awake. Like people play around their phone or whatever. Like I know people are more digital natives now than I ever was, but I think reading a nice handwritten list is a lot nicer. And it also gets in your head a little bit better, I think, because you're not the same reason why I think you should handwrite your notes in class. It slows you down a little bit. You're not being a stenographer, you're not distracted. And with memory, pretty much no matter who you are, it's going to be primarily visual anyway. So if you're seeing it as like, if I have a list of things and I'm trying to think of that list, I'm going to visualize my yellow legal pad.
Yes.
And your computer, people spend so much time on their computers and stuff that it's hard to get that visualization of that, because we see all kinds of stuff on our computers all day long.
Well, that's some really good advice. And I encourage students to pick up, or graduates to pick up strategies and tactics for the Finz Multistate Method, 6th edition. Has the 6th edition come out yet?
Yes, that one's out. Mm-hmm.
Okay, super. Now let's transition, because of course the National Conference of Bar Examiners is putting out the NextGen Bar Exam. And so eventually jurisdictions will have to jump on board to that transition or come up with their own bar exam. And I understand that you are writing a book on the NextGen Bar Exam.
Yes. Right now it's tentatively called the Ruskell Method for the NextGen Bar Exam. It might be the Ruskell Guide to NextGen Bar Exam. And so the next gen bar exam is going to be a new addition to the bar to address the criticisms that people have of the current bar exam, that it relies too much on rote memorization, which is what the Finz is trying to help you out with, and that it doesn't really test what you should be able to do as a lawyer. It also doesn't reflect the academy's, I guess you'd say, renewed or more interest or expansion of like legal clinics and externships where you're actually legal writing, all that kind of more on hand stuff that maybe 10 years ago wasn't as pushed, I guess. But so one of the things, so the idea with the next gen, what's going to be different about it is, first off, it takes off some of the topics, but they seem to be slowly being added in. And in the initial version, family law and trust and estates were not on it, but they're coming back. But
Right.
secure transactions is still gone, but who knows? It might come back. And what it's basically made up of, and business associations becomes more of a primary topic as the primary 7 topics, the multiple state for the current bar exam. And so what'll be made out of, which is a little different from the current one, is first off, you have multiple choice questions that, at least in the initial rounds, are going to be very much like the current MBE questions, but they're going to change over time, where some of the questions will have 6 choices, or now all the multiple choice has 4 choices. And some of them will have 6 choices and you have to pick 2. So that will change a little bit. Then they'll have, currently on the bar exam, there's legal writing portion called the MPT. Right now, that's a 90-minute thing where it's basically a legal writing assignment where you get a memo from your boss saying, I want a memo or a brief or possibly even a contract or something like that. And you're given file, which is like all the stuff you'd imagine you'd have from a case, like emails, your firm's contract language, whatever, and then a library of case law. And that's the only case law I can use in the state of Franklin, which is a made up state. We don't have a state of Franklin. And basically, you have to put those 2 things together and make whatever it is your boss wants. And it's graded by the states, and it tends to be graded by practitioners. So they're looking at it from the standpoint, like, if the student was my employee and I said, do this, is this what I want back? So with students, I always say, like, that's one of the most helpful things, I think, is to imagine, if students taking the bar and listening to this, with the MPT, make sure you do as many practice ones as you can. And a lot of times people don't, but they say, I know how to write. And it takes a long time to do it because it's 90 minutes and stuff. But all the time, and I don't know why statistically, we have at least 1 or 2 students probably every year that fail the bar exam by 1 point.
Yes.
Literally, yeah. So the same experience. Literally 1 multiple choice question, or if they'd done a little better in the MPT or a little better in the essays, they would be fine. It'd be over with. I'm in South Carolina, and we're at 266, and all the time we'll have somebody at 265 all the time. And a lot of times people don't do the MPT because there's a lot of stuff, but I think do as many practice ones as you can, and try to do a practice one in like a couple different things, like do a memo, do a brief, maybe do a weird one where they ask you to draft a contract or a will or something strange. Because years ago, there was an MPT, and it was about rules for a rugby club. And I swear some people were just thrown by the fact it was rugby, which had nothing to do with anything.
Yeah.
But they were kind of like, just like, oh my God, rugby. I don't know anything about rugby. Or if there's a contract, they're like, I didn't take contractual drafting. And it's designed, you didn't have to do any of that.
Right.
And again, goes back to the study so much that you're just angry. So if you see something weird, you go, I always tell my students, like, it's not going to happen. But let's say you should go into the bar. On the MPT, it says, draw a picture of the current Supreme Court. You go, okay, well, here we go. You try your best. You go, who's on the Supreme Court? And this is what they kind of look like. That's not going to happen, but just be like, all right, whatever it is you want to ask me, let's go. I can do this. So instead of the MPT on the new bar exam, it's just a PT, and it's just shorter. Same deal, but it's just 60 minutes instead of 90. And then the big change is the integrated question sets. And they're supposed to be more like what you do as an attorney. And so it usually starts out with some sort of document or something that you're supposed to take a look at, like email interview or just something like that, or maybe a contract, maybe a lease, something like that. And then you start getting asked questions on it. And those questions can be either be the classic multiple choice 4, they can be the new multiple choice 6 with the 2 options, or they can also have these kind of open-ended questions, like what would be avenues of investigation for this. Let's say you have a murder or something, like what might you look for, or what evidence could come in. Very open-ended kind of things. And then also these questions are supposed to have, like, in general, some sort of ethical issue to it. And the idea is you call them the integrated question set or even the counseling sets or whatever. And the idea is you're actually working with a client, and what would you do with that client? So that's the newest thing. Those are supposed to be about 24 minutes a pop. And the thing about them is a lot of it's like logic, like what would you do? And I think maybe the difficulty with that with students will be possibly how open-ended it is. Like on the essays where it's kind of just a short answer, like what would you do? Like for creative people, that might be tough. And you're like, what would I do? Well, I don't know. I'll get a UFO and fly to the moon. I don't know. You might come up with something crazy. But again, I think it's just a practice thing, doing enough practice of these things. And the book will contain a lot of practice of all this stuff that you can kind of see, okay, this is what they're trying to get me to do. Because ultimately, just like in law school or just like with a client, like if they just wanted to see if you knew stuff, they'd just be like, here's an open book, write everything you know about torts, which isn't the thing. And also not what a client's going to do. A client's not going to be like, what's everything you know about torts? So it's really like training yourself to realize that these questions are trying to get you to spit out specific things and training yourself to do that, which you can absolutely do.
So when is the Ruskell method on the NextGen Bar book from Aspen scheduled to come out?
It'll be in 2025. Next gen, the first states to do it will be 2026. Off the top of my head, I can't remember which states are doing it so far, but I think maybe like 10 or so. Another state just recently signed on.
Oklahoma just signed on for
Yeah,
2027.
yeah, Oklahoma did too. And also that's the other thing too, is like they're gonna sunset the current bar exam. For a while, they're going to keep providing it for states. So it really is states are either going to have to decide we're just writing this whole thing ourselves, like the old days, or they're going to have to jump on this eventually, I think.
Yes. Well, you have a lot of resources available for your students at the University of South Carolina School of Law, but also for other law students at other schools. The Strategies and Tactics for First Year Law Students, and that's in its second edition. Strategies and Tactics for the Finz Multistate Method, sixth edition. And the upcoming book you're writing on the NextGen Bar Exam, all through Aspen Publishing. Before we conclude, I want to ask you the final question that I ask all my guests, and that is, what are your predictions for the future of legal education in the coming decade?
Well, one thing I think, because of the cost of law school and stuff, and I think it's already happening, that academic success offices are going to be even more important to law schools. And also in the sense that the way the US news has changed with the bar exam being such a big thing of your score now than it was before, which is a good thing. But like back in the old days, I just think this story is funny, so I like it, that I was offered a job at a very, very high ranked law school. And I almost took it because it was so high ranked and I wanted to, I don't know, ego, but I didn't, because their plan was they didn't want to admit I worked there, because in their mind at the time, this is a long time ago, in their mind, their students they didn't need academic success. So the idea was I was going to have a title of being like head of the law journals, and I was going to work out of a Starbucks.
Really?
Oh yeah. And I
That's
really thought
crazy.
about that job because I really wanted to be like the kind of I don't know, like high school reunion revenge story, be like, haha, look where I work now. But I didn't, because I'd be working in Starbucks. But I think that attitude has really changed. I think the younger generation is so much better about asking for help and all kinds of things, like mental health stuff. I'm still on the tail end of the generation of like, you didn't, especially as a guy, you didn't have mental problems. You handle it yourself, from Texas too. So you handle it yourself and
Yeah.
blah, 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 blah. And I think this group is much better at saying, no, I really do need help with this. And I think law schools are recognizing that fact. So, it used to be academic success. It was usually a staff position, and might still be usually a staff position. But for law schools now, it's a faculty position, which gives it a little more oomph. A lot of schools have more of a department of academic success. It used to be a one-man show for me, but now we have more people. And I think people, and what's interesting is that old attitude about, like working on the Starbucks thing. At least with alumni, whenever I tell alumni what I do, they're always like delighted. They're like, I wish I had that when I was in law school. I was like, yeah, me too. Because again, I was back there going, a tort is a what? And I think I would have saved a lot of stress and whatever if someone just said, no, this is what you're supposed to be doing. And in the bar exam, we were just kind of thrown out there and said, okay, good luck, Godspeed. And nothing, my law school is great. Nothing against my law school, but I mean, that's just kind of the way it was.
I think you're exactly right. And now my feeling is always, if I accept a student, if our law school accepts a student and charges them what we charge them, we owe them all the resources that they're going to need to succeed, right? So I think that law schools are certainly changing that dynamic. And as you indicated, thankfully, students are not shy about expressing their need for the assistance, or at least a little less shy than they were. I think it will continue to. I think you're right. I hope you're right. But thank you so much for sharing news about the sixth edition of the Strategies and Tactics for the Finz Multistate Method and your upcoming book on the NextGen Bar that we'll look for in 2025, all your publications that we've talked about today through Aspen Publishing. Good luck to you and your students for this July bar exam, which
Thank you,
is
you too.
around the corner.
My mother has a mass said for all the bar students. I'll throw on you guys too.
Oh, I would really appreciate that.
Well,
Thank you.
what's funny about it is she's in Houston, but she's, I guess, decided years ago that this church at she's Catholic. This church in near Notre Dame has the best juju. So that's where she has a mass said, not at her home church at all. It's up in, I don't know if she's doing.
My students at this Catholic institution definitely want the good juju. So if
Yeah,
she would
so it's
stay
in
there
Notre
for
Dame.
them
Yeah,
too. Yeah.
I'll throw you on the prayer list. It'll be great.
Thank you. Really appreciate that, as do my students. Well, thanks so much, Alex Ruskell, for joining me today. And if you've enjoyed this conversation and want to hear from additional thought leaders in legal education, you can find additional episodes on Aspen Leading Edge's podcast page or on your favorite podcast channels. Thank you.